Hello, and welcome to the Clonestar Podcast. Today, we're diving into the shadows between the stars, and we're not doing it alone. We're joined by none other than James Swallow, a BAFTA-nominated New York Times and Sunday Times bestselling author, and the writer behind the newly released novel, Star Trek: Strange New Worlds Toward the Night. James is no stranger to the final frontier. He's penned stories across the original series, The Next Generation, Discovery, and now Strange New Worlds. Beyond Trek, his work includes acclaimed novels for Doctor Who, Warhammer 40K, Stargate, and the Tom Clancy Splinter Cell and Division franchises. With over 50 novels, audio dramas, and short stories, James is one of the most prolific and versatile writers working in science fiction today. In Toward the Night, he guides us into the forgotten edges of the galaxy, where a missing colony, a mysterious technology, and the emotional gravity of the Enterprise crew collide. It's a tale of memory, morality, and the messages we send into the universe. I'm your host, Jodi Pickens, and today we're heading toward the night. James, thanks for being here today.
Thank you. And that's a fantastic description of the book. I should have that on the back cover. That's really good.
Well, thank you. I have to brag a bit, but I was lucky enough to get a hard copy of the novel to read, and I just have to say, I enjoyed this thoroughly. I mean, I'm a Trekkie, obviously, and a fan of Strange New Worlds, but this was a great read. And I have to say that as the story went along and things kind of escalated and the pacing of the story picked up, I found myself reading faster and faster because I wanted to just take in more and more of it. So I think that's always a good sign, right?
Definitely. I mean, I think one of my unique, probably one of my best qualities as a writer is I'm good at doing pace. And so I always, when people say to me like, "Oh, I stayed up all night to read it," or "Oh, I had to read just another chapter," that really it makes you feel great. It's really rewarding to you.
Well, you definitely capture that in this book, and I will be singing its praises to everyone who's a Trek novel fan because it's a great read, and you did very well by that with the pacing. So I have to ask, one of the first things I thought about, you've written across several Trek eras, and what made Strange New Worlds stand apart for you?
You mean like as a writer or a fan?
Yeah, well, maybe both.
Okay, well, I mean, so to kind of like, if we set the Wayback Machine for a little bit, and let me tell you about like myself as a Trek fan as well as a Trek writer.
Absolutely.
Classic Star Trek, original series. Star Trek was my first fandom of any kind of fandom. So that's always been my first Star Trek, my favorite Star Trek. And Strange New Worlds to me feels like something that absolutely captures the same texture and the same sort of stylistic narrative. And I just really love that. And so for me to see that come back, and it kind of brought back a lot of what I really love about Star Trek. So I had so much fun watching the show. And just enjoying watching the characters do their thing and just going out on these Star Trek adventures. So when the opportunity came down, it was Kirsten Beyer, who formerly a Star Trek Voyager novelist, and kind of like, our sort of connection with the official Star Trek TV shows now, as she's moved up and kind of like become a producer. Kirsten was the one who said, would you like to do this? And, obviously I said yes, because I would be crazy not to, So it was a fantastic opportunity to be given that chance to do it, and I just seized on it with both hands, because I thought, I love these characters, I love what they do, I love the stories they tell. How can I get in there and tell a cool story about this? Yeah. And so that was kind of how we all kicked off on it. Kirsten gave me the opportunity, and I love her for doing that. And I looked back at the show and I thought, well, what is it that I really enjoy the most about these characters' narratives? I love Pike as a character. I think he's so much fun. He's a really, really great captain and such an empathetic character with such a strong moral core to him. And I really wanted to put him, as I often do with my characters, in a horrible situation and then see what happens. So I thought I want to do a story about Pike, but I also wanted to do a story about Erica Ortegas, who's another character that really sort of stuck out to me. I love pilots. I love fighter pilots. I love Top Gun characters. Right? I always love that sort of thing. So she's definitely, a character I warmed to straight away. And I felt she hadn't been that well served in the show, to be honest, for personal storylines. And I thought, well, here's an opportunity for me to maybe kind of redress that balance a little bit. So the idea of it being a Pike Ortegas story that was kind of my initial germ of my idea, and we just kind of rocked on from there.
Yeah, it's great. And I think you being a fan is it shows in the book. And I think a lot of fans of Strange New Worlds are big fans of Pike and Eric Ortegas. Like, those are some fan favorite characters there. So this book is definitely going to appeal to a big part of the fan base for sure. You brought up, this is kind of the set in the early days. Strange New World is part of that early days of the Federation and Starfleet. But this book also even goes to some of the formative time of the Federation and the Starfleet. So what was it like to reference some of those historical moments or points in both the Federation and Starfleet's history?
I'm assuming we're going to go into spoiler territory here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So just, for anybody watching, we're going to spoil the hell out of this now. So
we'll preface that all over the place, I promise.
Yeah, well, so that kind of what I always think of as the Archer Enterprise NX-01 era. I was a big fan of Enterprise. I think that was a great show. I always felt like it could have done so much more. I think the show suffered from the fact that it was cancelled after 5 seasons. I would love to have seen another 2 seasons of Enterprise getting deep into sort of like, into the weeds of the sort of the Proto Federation. So I've always liked that era. And because for Pike and Company, that's only like 100 years in the past, so it's much more in living memory for them. Mm-hmm. And the more I thought about doing a story that would touch on that era, I thought, well, I can play with a lot of the cool elements of that universe, and I can show these 2 different eras of Starfleet and the people in them, because a lot of the friction in this story comes from characters being forced together in unpleasant situations. And in this story, we have Pike's crew and a crew from the Archer era who are, they're both Starfleet and they're both decent, good guys, right? But they come from different eras and they see the world in different ways. And when you put those characters together, immediately there's going to be friction between them. And for me, that was really interesting to say, how do these 2 eras of Starfleet and these two ages of Starfleet characters affect each other when they're both in a situation and there's like outside pressure coming in?
Yeah. Compelling stuff is what it creates, right? I mean, that's fun. So I have to ask, did you intentionally sneak in some references for diehard Trek fans in this book?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's, when I was coming up with the lost starship that I was going to use, and I'm looking at the stuff from the era of sort of like the NX-01, and I'd really like the Franklin, the Freedom class starship that we see in Star Trek Beyond, which is from that era, because it's such a big, chunky piece of metal. It's like this. It's absolutely at the opposite end of the aesthetic spectrum to the 1701 Enterprise, which is this sleek, gorgeous-looking starship, and the Freedom class ships are just big, chunky, brute force vessels. And I thought, I love that design. I love the fact that it's so very different. How can I bring that back? So I brought the USS Baldwin, which is a ship that's in the same class as that. So I brought that tech in and some of the other bits of hardware, and it was fun to sort of like revisit that and just have our characters, have our Strange New Worlds characters being on that set, as it were, and explore.
Yeah, absolutely. Show asked me to ask you about. I think there's a reference to the Capellan Power Cat that may be a animated series reference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a thing that me and a lot of the other writers do, is that back in the day, not so much now with Lower Decks kind of redeeming it a little bit, but it used to be back in the day that the animated series was, we don't talk about the animated series. It's all a bit sort of, it's a bit sort of silly, but we all had a love for it. So I think even to this day, all of us try to sneak in at least one little reference that goes like, the animated series is valid, it's canon, you gotta give it some love. So yeah, there's a little reference to a Capellan Power Cat in there.
Yeah.
And lots of sort of like small little details, whether it's just referencing the name of a planet or a starship. All of this helps to kind of bed the story into, this is Star Trek. This is taking place in this world and environment that we're all familiar with. We have these little points of connective matter, whether it's a character or a place or just someone saying, next week we're going off to Forty Eridani, right, or something like that. All of those things help us set the book in the Star Trek world that we know and love.
Absolutely. And I mean, Trek fans love Easter eggs like that. I mean, and connectivity like that. it's kind of the basis of the world we exist in the Trek universe. So seeing that in the novels, and especially bringing in things like the animated series, which, you know, tends, like you said, can be a rogue element for some people. Yeah. But we'll take that. We love it. The book really begins with people evacuating essentially a doomed world. But some choose to stay behind, you know, kind of not heeding the warnings and maybe the general overall thoughts of the rest of the people. But was this a moment kind of tied to our post-truth reality, like the era of alternative facts and denial of science? Yeah.
Very much so, you know, because I think, you know, Star Trek always, one of the things it does most perfectly is it holds this funhouse mirror up to the real world and says, like, okay, you know, this is the planet of the sort of guys with lumpy foreheads, but actually we're talking about, you know, we're talking about a story about, say, you know, a climate change story. I mean, this is talking about climate change, but we could be talking about sort of politics. We could be talking about religion. We could talking about sexuality. Star Trek can do all those things because it dresses it up in a sci-fi costume, and it gives you a little bit of distance. And you go, well, now we can address something that maybe if you were looking at it straight on, you might feel a bit uncomfortable with. But if we give it a sci-fi coating, you get a little bit of distance, you can kind of think about it a little bit more. So that was definitely, you know, a subtext of this. You know, yeah, the threat that's going on at the beginning of the story, it is climate change. It's about, you know, in this case, it's the planet's star is bombarding it with radiation, it's destroying the surface of their world. And the people on this planet have to make this radical decision about what they're going to do next. And I did feel like, you know, this is an opportunity to just to talk about our world, about how people react to kind of sometimes this information, whether they feel it's truth or it's post-truth. So yeah, that was definitely me just trying to say, like, you know, here's a little kind of connection to the real world. And hopefully with these stories, we are telling basically just kind of pulp adventure sci-fi stories. But if I can leave somebody with something that makes them think about the real world that they live in, then that's just a great bonus.
Yeah. Well, and that's the beauty of Trek, that it allows you to do that. I love how you said that, kind of like the funhouse mirror look at our reality. And it's well done in this book. And I think people will really enjoy that part of it. How do you balance then your approach to like the allegory with the narrative when embedding that real world themes into Trek? Like, do you come at a story first with that idea?
Generally, it's kind of like it emerges out of the writing, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't sit down to say, okay, I'm going to tell a polemic story here and that sort of thing, you know. And there are Star Trek stories that can do that, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, my intention with this particular story was to tell an action adventure romp that gave me the opportunity to foreground some characters that I really like. But on top of that, I thought, well, Star Trek is always a morality play. It's always a series of stories about heroes doing heroic things, people working together for the greater good. That in itself is a moral story. So you can't get away from Star Trek. If you tell a Star Trek story, it's always got some sort of moral component to it. So that's just baked in from the get-go.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I think it's part of the appeal of Trek in general, but it's great seeing it coming out in the novels also. That's what we love.
We're just trying to bring to the material, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's what helps kind of keep it all tied together, doesn't it? Like, you know, that's good. So this narrative, what I also enjoyed about the book, it moves between timelines and locations, and several, actually. I mean, it's very layered in that way. But what are the challenges of writing an expansive kind of time-jumping, timey-wimey Trek novel?
Well, you know, I know some writers would kind of look at this and say, well, break it up into different sections and write one piece in one first and then the other piece the other way. But I don't tend to do that. I'm very much kind of like I start at the beginning and I finish at the end. So for me, the way I got that stuff kind of straight in my head first is I plotted a lot of it out. So I've got a decent story arc worked out, and I knew, like, okay, this is going to happen here, this is going to happen here, and I have it all blocked out before I start writing. So I'm a plotter, more of a pantser, you know, if you're familiar with those terms.
Yes.
That's the way that I work. So with this sort of thing, because I had a good structure for it, and it is, the whole narrative is basically a closed time loop. When you get to the end, you realize that it's a loop that all these events kind of figure back into themselves. Once I had that structure straight in my head, I was like, oh, okay, I know what I'm doing now, and I just went straight forward with it.
Yeah, it's fun, and it felt like you said, pacing was definitely a part of that too, about how much time we were spending in each place. But you never felt like you were out of the loop. You felt like you were right there in it as a reader, and it was enjoyable.
Yeah, that was important to me, to make sure that the pacing felt right, because I didn't want to sort of hang around with one group of characters too much to make that sort of start to slow down. So that's why it was immediately kind of like, okay, we're going to cut to this group and then we're going to cut back again. So you feel like the momentum continues as the story moves forward.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Erica Ortegas earlier and wanting this to kind of be part of the focus of the story. And she's portrayed beautifully. She's confident and grounded and emotionally measured. It's like we see her in the series, right? But what made you want to build out her backstory in this novel?
Well, I got to say, I really love Melissa Navia's performance on the show, and this is hand on heart. I've got to say, all of the performances on the show are really strong.
Yeah,
and that, to be honest, helped me, made it really easy for me to write those characters, because I just have to watch the show and go, oh, there's the voice, right? Just got to do that. I've just got to, there's no point in the show where I go, well, what does this character sound like? No, it's right there. It's right there. And they do such a great job. So I loved her performance on the show. And I thought, well, what can we do that would be interesting for her? And I thought about telling a story, kind of a contemporary, forward-set story. But I was thinking to myself, her background is what really interests me. Is that, where is she from? What was in all of these characters? What forms them? What choices did they make earlier in their lives that brought them to where they are right now? And that, connecting with the time travel idea, that was the kind of logical direction the story was going to go in. And I thought, I want to tell this story about her, which is a kind of combination of the kind of be careful what you wish for, never meet your heroes kind of theme going through this story. Is I wanted to look at her and say, well, what was the thing? Who was the person that made her decide to be the woman we see in the show? And then have her meet that person and find out that what she thought about that person is not true.
Yeah.
And how do you deal with that situation moving forward? What does that say about you? What does that say about the choices you've made in your life? And then where do you go when you have to move past that point? And to me, that's really interesting. That's great character stuff going on there. A brilliant situation where you can put characters together and have sparks fly, and drama just kind of evolves right out of that.
Right. Yeah, it's fun to read. It's engaging, like I've said before, but I think more importantly, it really felt like it stayed true to Ortegas as a character. Like, it all felt very plausible. It made sense with who we see on the screen. So that was fantastic. So go ahead.
I was gonna say that was my intention all the way through, is to try and feel true to her. And the great thing about tie-in fiction is that we can provide the fans with an internal viewpoint of characters, which you don't often really get to see on TV. So we can show you what's going on inside their heads. And I always think of it as like a box. Each character, you can try to open that box up and just kind of unfold it a little bit more and say, well, I'm not going to change anything radical. I'm not going to kill a character off or anything like that. But what I can do is I can show you a facet of them that maybe you haven't seen on the TV show. And I can emulate that and I can highlight it and just give you a little bit more about it.
Yeah. You speak of that internal kind of dialogue, seeing that side of them. You did that really well with Mbenga too. From the Enterprise, when he's kind of serving obviously as the chief medical officer, but also is on the bridge quite a bit in this story. So we get to hear a lot of his internal thoughts and perspective from that route too, and it's a lot of fun. He's a pretty stoic guy on screen most of the time too. So, I
was going to say, the thing about using him. One of the things I tried to do in the story was break up pairings of characters that we see a lot and try and put pairings together that we don't see very often. So one of the situations in this story is Una is in charge of the Enterprise and she's facing off against this Klingon officer. And Mbenga knows this officer has been in battle with them before. And so Una says, well, I need you at my side to help me with this because we've got to find a way to deal with this. So Mbenga he's not really working as a doctor in this story. He's working as he's almost fulfilling the first officer role in this story, and it gives him a different thing to do and explores his character in a different way. And I thought that was really fun to just take these characters and just push them. I did this with everybody in the book. I pushed them out of their comfort zone and say, okay, deal with the situation now. And that was really fun to write.
Yeah. It really is. I think it's fun as a fan to read too, because like you said, it pushes them outside their comfort zone as characters, but we get to learn more about them in that process. And, that's what we want, right? Is more, more information always. You mentioned about Ortega's kind of meeting a relative, and it's a relative from their past that really, influenced her. It really stands out. Obviously, it's pretty central to the story. What was it like kind of creating the scene where Ortega's actually got to confront, her, I think it was her great grand aunt?
That's an interesting story, because the first time they meet each other, it's a shock for her, because Ortegas knows who this woman is, but the woman doesn't know who she is. So she's just like struck dumb by, oh my God, this person who's been this major influence on my life and is right there. Someone who for Ortegas, this woman's always been like a kind of a ghostly phantom sort of influence on her life. Somebody who she never actually got to meet growing up, but has kind of had this kind of gravitational effect on the person that she's become. And then suddenly that person's right there, and they're actually quite spiky, unpleasant, ill-tempered. And it's like, oh, you're not at all what I expected. How do I even deal with this? And of course, once that happens, inevitably the narrative's going to deliver a moment where the two of them go, who the hell are you? Well, this is who I am, and this is how it goes on. And for Ortegas, that moment where she gets to say to her, look, I don't care whether you're a nice person or not, this is how you influence my life, and I'm taking control of that. And I thought that was a real kind of for her, a benchmark moment, planting the flag in the sand, saying, this is who I am, this is what I learned from you, and you can take that or leave it. And if you don't like it, that doesn't matter to me, because what's important is what I took from it.
Yeah.
And it's I think the line that encapsulates it is, she says, the character's name is Luciana, her great aunt, and she says to her, you opened the door that I walked through.
Yes.
And that to me is the key of that whole confrontation, is that's what that story is about for her.
Yeah. I think it's relatable to a lot of people too, in that looking back and, maybe a family member, recent or distant, in people's kind of line of family, they can be influential in people say all the time, don't meet your heroes, which I think is said in the book quite often too. But sometimes our version of who they are is a little hidden behind the guise of the past. There was, I think Spock plays an interesting role in this book, and a pretty important role, but he sends a message towards the end of the book that is meant to communicate with the team that's lost in time. And the message, the first line of that, he says, this is a message sent with hope. And I think that's a powerful line, but I thought it was particularly powerful coming from Spock, because there's emotion tied to that.
Very much so.
Yeah, and I was wondering, why was that a significant line for him to say at that moment?
Well, when I was developing this story, I wanted to make more of the Spock's relationship with Christine Chapel. Just to kind of wind back a little bit and explain something. Originally, this story was going to be set in the third season of the show.
Oh, okay.
We had to move stuff around, so we had to put it in the second season. And so I'm looking at Spock's relationship with, as I was doing with all the characters, looking at the relationships they were in at that point in time. And Spock's in a really interesting place there, because him and Chapel have had this on again, off again, will they, won't they relationship. And at this point, it's done. Mm-hmm. And I remember talking to Kristen Meyer about that. And Kristen said to me, the way she encapsulates, she said, Christine is over this, but Spock is not. That's where they are emotionally in that point. And I thought that's a really interesting place to put it, because this is young Spock. This is Spock who is still exploring what it means to be half human, half Vulcan. He's still trying to get his head straight about who he is. And he won't become the Leonard Nimoy version of Spock that we know, who's a bit kind of more kind of on point at this point. So I thought, okay, well, how do I explain that? How do I explore that in an interesting way? And to me, it was like, well, he just can't get his head straight about his feelings towards Christine. And so when he's doing this and he's sending this message, that's really him talking directly to her.
Yeah.
Saying, I hope you're okay, because I am genuinely worried about her, about you back there. And a lot of the times in the story, when the situation is moving forward, he's thinking to himself, I can't think straight because I'm worried about her. And even at the end of the story, when everybody comes back, the first thing that happens, Pike is the first one to come back, and he says, "Oh, we lost somebody along the way." And Spock's first reaction is, "Please, not Christine." And he's surprised at the strength of his own emotional reaction. And at the end of that, I think what's going through Spock's mind is, I have to kind of, if you pardon my language, get my shit together.
Yeah, yeah.
I have to figure out what I'm doing because
Yes.
she already understood. I need to figure out what's happening to me. And of course, the next episode that takes place after this story is charades, when we go to Vulcan and we have that whole kind of shenanigans that go on there, right?
Yeah.
So Spock's, he's a little bit messed up in this story emotionally, and I tried to just kind of be true to that, to give him, not only to give him agency in the story, but also say, here's where he is, and hopefully give people an insight and something to empathize with.
Yeah, absolutely. With that, I had to say you do give a historical kind of context of where this story is landing in line with the series. I love that. That makes it so much easier for, I think, as a reader to kind of understand where these characters are, and at least from what we've seen on our screens, what they've been experiencing in those moments. So I appreciated that as a reader. The book also explores a lot, beyond just the characters, a lot of autonomy, artificial intelligence, the kind of legacy of Trek and Starfleet and the Federation, but also trauma. And I wondered what themes kind of really resonated with you, the most strong as a writer.
Well, I mean, I like the idea of looking at these characters who are especially the characters from the past, from the Baldwin, who are these kind of time lost refugees. And certainly, again, this is a real world antecedent we're talking about here, is that we're constantly seeing people on television, on the news, people who are being displaced from their environments, from their places in time, as it were. And again, I'm looking at it for a Star Trek kind of lens and saying, well, what if you were displaced not just from where you came from, but like literally the era in which you grew up in? How does that affect you? What kind of trauma does that have? And how do you get past it? All of these things are really interesting concepts. So I wanted to place a group of characters in that situation, because we've often seen in Star Trek a kind of the academic discussion about, oh, what would you do if you went back in time and changed these kind of things? And it's very easy to kind of have that kind of classroom conversation, like talking about the trolley problem, how many would you sacrifice to do this? It's needs of the many, needs of the few, and it's very easy to have that conversation when you're just talking about like pieces on a game board. Right. But it's hard to have that conversation when you're looking that person in the eye and going, well, I'm going to have to leave you to die. And I thought, I want to put Pike in that situation because he's such a strongly morally defined character. How would he react? I mean, let's be honest, how he would react, because we all know what kind of guy he is. But I thought it was interesting to make him be right up against that and say, okay, how are you going to deal with this, Christopher Pike? What are you going to do? That to me is good, compelling, interesting drama.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned this earlier about kind of that internal dialogue that the characters each had, but his was so fun as a character in this book too, because he references a lot of what he knows about his future and where he is in that novel. Like, he knows that, well, if I change anything, is that going to change this? And there's a lot of that comes first to him a lot, as we see it happen in the series too. But I like how he kept moving quickly past that to the situation at hand, like refocused himself as a character.
And in that situation, Pike knows, quote unquote, right? He knows, oh, I'm going to die like this.
Right.
So on some level, he knows, well, I'm going to get through this because this isn't how I die.
Right.
But the question for him is what about the people around me?
Mm-hmm.
It's all these people I care about. I'm not worried about myself. It's because he's thinking, I could do anything I like because I'm not going to die. He could jump in front of a guy with a gun and go, and his gun's going to jam, right? Because he's not going to die. He knows it's not going to happen. But then he's thinking about all the people he cares about, and he doesn't have that assurance about their future. So he's worried about them. He's worried about, how do I get my people home? And again, that's a very Pike thing, right? It's leadership, and his crew is important to him. How do I make sure it's not about me? It's about my people. It's about my team.
I think he says in the book a few times about when he's referring to his crew, he instantly goes to, family. Like, this is a family. And it's very true to, Trek and our core bridge crews that we see throughout the Trek universe. But I think in particular for Pike as a captain, he very much so makes that transition quickly. And it was great seeing that carried through in the novel. There's a lot of balance that you do with darker themes, with grief and war and isolation. How do you balance that with the optimism that Trek is known for?
Well, it's that's part of the kind of the essential cocktail of it all, right? I mean, Star Trek, and certainly with Strange New Worlds, while it is a kind of a lighter take on Star Trek, I would say it's not kind of grimdark. Like maybe you take a show like Deep Space Nine was a show that did a really great work, a great trade in sort of the darker themes of Star Trek, and Strange New World is not that show. But there's no reason why we can't look at darker moments and we can't address those things. Again, it's the stuff that kind of evolves out of the storytelling. If there's a darker theme that needs to be addressed here, then it needs to be addressed. I don't want to just kind of gloss over it and say, I'm going to give you the Hallmark Channel version of this where everything's fine. It's like, no, because it's not, because we are dealing with issues here, things that will cause trauma. We are dealing with death and destruction and violence and horror. All of these things are going on underneath it. But it's the essential Star Trek kind of impetus to kind of go, we're going to get past that. We're going to work together. We're going to get past these darker moments and hopefully move on to a better place.
Yeah. The other side, well, you do that actually in layers too. It's not just, we're not just following, like here's A and B and that's, in the end, we're going to get the end plot. But like, we're seeing all of that happen, on the Enterprise, on this other planet, in another time. And I think that's, we're getting that from all these different angles as the story progresses. And again, compelling reading, which is fantastic storytelling. So thank you for that. Did you draw some inspiration from past Trek or larger sci-fi works in general when you're constructing kind of the machine-based narrative that exists?
I mean, in a general sense, yeah, absolutely. I mean, my kind of personal brief for myself for this is I wanted to build a storyline that feels like it could be an episode of the show.
Yeah.
That feels and part of that is kind of like going back and deconstructing what a TV episode is and going, how do I make it feel like that? So I'm not going off and doing a huge kind of widescreen adventure. I looked back at this and I thought, maybe with a few budget cuts, you could have actually made this, maybe a two-part.
Yeah, exactly. It'd be like an excellent two-parter.
So that was my sort of intention from the beginning, is to try and create something that feels like a TV episode, because I feel like that's my brief as a Star Trek tie-in writer, is I want to deliver to my audience the experience of that show in prose form and maybe just a little more. Just elevate it with that internal viewpoint. I feel like that's job one for me. So in terms of like going back to look at classic Trek episodes, yeah, absolutely. I tried to emulate that tempo. So from the original series and from Strange New Worlds, because the original series was actually airing on TV at the time when I was writing this. So like 6 o'clock every day, I would come down and my wife's in the kitchen cooking dinner and the TV's on. I'm like, oh, what are you watching? And it's Star Trek. Nice. And I would play a game. I would come in. I would say like, okay, I'm not going to look at the screen. How quickly can I guess what episode it is? And because I've seen it so many times, I was like, oh, that's Balance of Terror. That one's Amok Time, whatever. And we would laugh and joke about it because we're both big Star Trek fans. So yeah, I think I was just, rather than picking up any specific elements, I was just trying to soak up the feel of both shows to try and just make sure the book feels of a type of a piece with that era of Star Trek.
With the machine-based piece with this, did you think of it like AI?
How do you mean?
Well, that it kind of has to act independently without any outside users for an extended period of time, right?
Oh, for the archway.
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
I didn't really go that. No, I didn't really think much more about the design of that. That's more of the technology. It's kind of dumb technology, It's not sort of self-aware or anything like that.
Sure.
The creators, the the Sicarians, the aliens who live on the planet. They're like kind of bear-like, earth sign bear-like creatures, is kind of the way I imagine them. Their technology, I imagined it was always kind of like quite in harmony with their environment. So it's all kind of carved out of stone, and it has a sort of naturalistic kind of look to it, not kind of cold machine-like, but very kind of like a carved piece of art. That's, I think, if I had to draw a picture of it, that's kind of like the style I think it would be. So more naturalistic than mechanical, I think.
Yeah. I like the idea that you said you wanted it to be more visual and artistic. That comes across too, I think, in the novel, because there's so much reference to their hieroglyphics, or their carvings or writings. And I think that just in the way that it's simply described or communicated really translates. So we talked a little bit about Ortegas and how her journey is so deeply personal. Did you see her growth from a beginning to the end in the novel overall?
I think it's more just kind of adding another layer. It's like it's going back to what I was saying about opening up the box of the characters, revealing a little something of her. We're going to be seeing more of Ortegas in the next season of the show. I've been lucky enough that when I was working on the novel, I was getting to see episode scripts from season 3.
Oh, fantastic!
And let me tell you, there's some great stuff coming up. There really is. And one of the things that gets referenced in the book is her brother Beto, who's a character, and you will see him as a main character turning up in season 3. So I got to it's almost like a kind of call forward. So I reference him, and then hopefully readers will read the book and then they'll watch the episode and go, oh, there's that guy that Jim mentioned. And here he is. So I knew that stuff was coming down the pipe. And so it gave me an opportunity to kind of pre-position a little bit of story to just sort of prime, oh, this guy's going to be part, you hear a little bit more about him, but then you'll get to meet him and you'll get to see that relationship that she has with this guy. And off the back of that, I thought, well, let's just develop more of that background. Let's go into who she was growing up. So there's little references in there about sort of, her grandparents and things like that, and her parents and where she grew up. All of that went off to the team working on the TV show to get their approval.
Nice.
Sure that everything is kind of meshing together really well.
Yeah.
And they pretty much gave me a free hand to just do what I wanted. And I said, if there's anything that we're not happy with, we'll tell you to pull back on it. But I didn't get anything like that. They were all happy with the direction that I did. So hopefully that'll inform her character to some degree moving forward. Because it used to be the stuff we did on tie-ins was very siloed. So the books would be here and the shows would be here and never. But since we've had somebody like Kirsten working on the show, the door kind of swings both ways now. So we can kind of contribute a little bit of information that kind of hopefully will sort of line in a little bit more of the background of the characters that you're seeing on the TV shows.
Yeah, that has to be pretty freeing and exciting as a writer to be able to know that you have that kind of carte blanche way to go with the story. That
it's in a way it's good, and it's also daunting because one of the things about doing tie-in stuff is that it's almost like being given. I often talk about the toy box. You're given this box of toys, and you can play with the toys, but you have to put them back in the box at the end of the day. You don't often get to add new toys to the box. It's a rare opportunity to do that. I've worked on a lot of different tie-in franchises. Some of them are very kind of open, like, oh yeah, do whatever you want. Other ones are like, no, very super, super strict. And Star Trek has kind of always been in the middle, but with the recent years of the shows, recent times that we've been doing, there's been a lot more, like I say, this door that swings both ways, much more flex between us and them. And I think that enables us on both sides to just do stronger stories, to make it all feel like it's of a piece rather than stuff that's just siloed off in two different places.
I think that is also really important in this era of streaming, where we aren't getting a 26 episode season anymore and have that time to get into as deep of a dive into the characters and their backstories as maybe we've seen in previous series. So I think that's important to have that kind of, again, connective tissue and bringing that all together. I know I appreciate it.
I feel like as a tie-in writer, part of my job is to support the strength of the franchise, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so obviously the show leads the way because it's the primary sort of source of everything. But, the books, the comic books, video games, everything around that, all of these are avenues through which new narrative can be delivered, new material about that world and about those characters. So it's important that we do our best to support that in the best way we can. As a reader, I mean, I'm going back in time a little bit now. I remember when I was reading the original James Blish novelizations of the classic Trek series,
Yeah.
the Star Trek 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those books. And a friend of mine said to me, "Have you read this one called The Entropy Effect?" And I was like, "What is this? I don't remember that episode." He says, "No, it's a brand new story. It's a totally new story, totally new plot line." And I was kind of amazed that, are we allowed to do that? Are we allowed to have that? And he was like, "Yeah, here's a brand new Star Trek story." And fantastic book written by Vonda McIntyre. Absolutely recommend it to anybody if you're a Trek fan, especially if you're a fan of the original cast. And that always stuck with me. And now all these years later, now I'm the guy who gets to do that. That's in the back of my head every time going, remember you're writing this book for somebody like you that time who didn't know that they could get a story like that. And so I'm always thinking of that reader, that other version of me who's coming to it for the first time. I want to make sure that they get a story that feels supported and connected to the whole.
I appreciate that as a fan. Absolutely, that you have that perspective, because I think we do look to the novelizations to be, another way to get some insight into furthering the story, of what we see. So that's fantastic. I have to talk about Una. She faces some moral complexity and command decisions, and under extreme pressure. So what did you want to reveal about her as a leader and in leadership roles?
So to begin with, I thought it would be fun to just put her in the captain's chair.
Yeah.
Because we haven't seen her do that very much. And I like writing space battles. And so every story, I always like to have a bit of pew-pew in there somewhere. Well, let's put Una in that situation. But because she's such a sharp, thoughtful, intelligent character, she's not going to go straight to the photon torpedoes and phasers straight away. She is a thinker. She's a tactician. So immediately that started to make the shape of the story for me. It's like she's going to try and think her way out, not fight her way out. And I thought, okay, what's the worst person to put her up against? Is the exact opposite of that. Is a Klingon warrior, is Commander Bren, and Commander Bren is the absolute dark mirror of Una, because all she wants to do is fight. So every situation that they're in, Una is trying to say, can we just back off a little bit here? Let's calm down. Everybody just calm down. Let's get through this without doing anything terrible. And Bren is like, no, I want to fight. I want to get into a fight. And so these two characters are at opposite ends of the spectrum. How do you navigate that? And Una's in this situation where she's trying to get her people, she wants to get her people back, but she's also got to worry about the crew of the ship in that moment right now. It's how do I keep everybody protected? How do I keep everybody safe? And how do I do it without firing all the guns off and possibly igniting a war? So she's in that situation. That's great tension to put her in. But because she's such a thoughtful, intelligent character, and because she's such a chess player, 2 or 3 or 4 moves ahead of everybody, that was really fun to get inside her head, have her working with Mabenga saying, okay, how do we solve this problem with the minimum amount of gunplay? That's the conundrum that she has to fight her way through in her sort of thread through the story.
Yeah, it was fun to see, again, a nice job of, like, obviously externally what she's saying and doing in front of the crew, in front of the foe she's facing with the Klingon warrior, but also that internal dialogue that she was having and struggling with, the moral compass guide of wanting to, save her fellow crewmen, her friends, but also, her duty as the interim captain of the vessel to save the crew and the ship at all costs. So it was great. I also like too, toward the end of the book, where Pike has returned to the Enterprise and he's ready to take back the chair, and he's like, "Is it okay if I, take my chair back, Commander?" And she goes, "Well, for now." That's that was fun.
I did enjoy that moment where she makes a joke of it, but she's kind of like, "Oh, you can have it back."
Yeah.
Really hard work, And and it's not that she's not ready for that, but it's like I'm exhausted because this is so difficult to do.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite lines in that moment is when Pike comes back and I think it's M'Benga says to him, like, he says, like, was everything fine while I was away? And he was like, well, Una's got a report for you. And he's like, which one of us broke the most regulations while we were separated? And that was fun for me to do, to write.
Yeah, because it's really about their dynamic too. Like, they had this at times this brother sister vibe of yeah. And I think it really is fun.
I mean, I think if there's anything I do regret I didn't get to do is I didn't get to do much with the two of them because they're split for most of the novel.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit at the beginning and a little bit at the end, which I think was fun to write, just to have them have a kind of little bit of banter there. I didn't get to do the kind of Una Pike dream team stuff.
Right.
Maybe in a future book I'll get to write that, but yeah, that would be fun to do.
Oh, sure. They're great together. They're great characters to partner with and see them in scenes and situations. So speaking of Pike, he often serves as the kind of the emotional core of our Strange New World cast and crew. So how did you challenge or deepen his character here in this story?
Well, I just wanted to, just put him in a situation that challenges who that guy is. I said before about how he is, and you hit the point really well there. He is that moral center. He is that good-hearted man at the core of all of this. And it's easy to be a saint in paradise, right? When you believe in not being challenged. Mm-hmm. And Pike finds himself in a situation where he faces off a group of people, and history says that these people are going to die, and the rules and regulations say, well, you can't interfere here. And that's the exact anathema to him. He's like, I can't leave these people behind because it's just not who he is.
Right.
And the question he has to wrestle with is, first of all, it's like, how do I keep my people alive, my small little family of characters who are with me? How do I keep them alive? Because that's his primary goal. But then he realizes, in fact, I guess he really knew it all along, is he looks at this larger group of people who are also Starfleet and to a degree his extended family. His duty is also to them. How does he keep them alive and deal with this sort of like situation? He's in this being temporarily displaced and having, the rules and regulations saying you're not supposed to mess around with this. And in the end, Pike's like, well, damn the rule book. I'm just going to do it. And that to me feels like that's him in a nutshell. Mm-hmm. He'll do the right thing, even if it's the consequences are not that great.
Yeah. And it felt very true to who he is.
Yeah.
Or how we know him. Yeah, absolutely. I have to bring up another, I think, core character to this novel are the foes that are on the planet in the displaced time. Lots of bugs.
Yeah.
What made you choose bugs?
I went through some ideas about what kind of creatures they would be. I wanted the essentially you've got kind of five different groups of characters. You've got the Enterprise characters, you've got the characters from the Baldwin, you've got the aliens, the Sicarians, and then you've got the bugs on the planet. And I guess the Klingons as well would count too. So yeah. I wanted a threat force on the planet that would be something that all of the characters would have to deal with, that would be very, very dangerous. And I wanted it to be something that you couldn't reason with. So I even put a line in where one of the characters says, have you tried talking to them? He's like, yeah, that's how you did that to Eden. So, and I wanted to have a situation where the characters are facing, and it's almost like an environmental problem. It's like arguing with a hurricane, right? You can't do it. Just got this situation. How are you going to deal with it? And I went through a few different ideas. At one point, I was thinking of the creatures. Actually, they were going to be like big cats.
Oh, okay.
I thought about like basically the one version of the story was they were basically going to be stalked by giant tigers. It was going to be something like that. And I thought it's just not icky enough. I just wanted to do something. And I thought I wanted to kind of make the environment of that planet, I wanted to make it feel oppressive and threatening and horrible in every way I could think so. That's why when you're on the planet, it's always tipping it down with rain and there's mud. garbage everywhere, and it's a horrible, horrible place. And I wanted to do that because I wanted to make you feel bad for the people who are stranded there. So you'd be reading that and go, "Good grief! I wouldn't want to spend 5 minutes on this horrible planet." And then the environment is awful. I thought, okay, and then how do I dial that up? So, well, it's also infested by these rapacious, monstrous creatures. And that, to me, that felt like, okay, what would be an interesting creature? And I thought about these kind of kaiju-sized dragonflies. Something you think of a dragonfly as a kind of pretty, lovely, soft creature. Like, no, this is a horrible, monstrous killer dragonfly. This is going to rip you to bits and feed you to its larva, right? And so, out of that, the idea of these just different types of these creatures. So there's the larval form, which is a bit like a kind of lamprey, which is a crawling creature with a mouthful of teeth. And then you've got the sort of skittering kind of like bug type kind of, I imagine them as like a mosquito without any wings moving around that kind of crab-like fashion. And then you've got the big ones, the big mummers that kind of come down and like, pluck people off the ground and rip them to bits. All of that was to create this, just something horrible and a terrible threat to these characters that is ever present throughout this story, that just dials up the pressure. So not only are they dealing with their own interpersonal relationships, not only are they dealing with the time travel issue, you're also being attacked by giant bugs as well, just to kind of like, put the pressure level up higher and higher and higher for them.
Mm-hmm. I enjoyed enjoyed the bugs as a foe, because it wasn't just they were on the ground, they were in the air. They could meet them anywhere that the team tried to go, and that made it compelling too. I also enjoyed the fact that they're in their colony or hive is in this like citadel type tower, and it felt very Star Trek cave like when we were inside there, and I love that nod to the caves, because
you can imagine that sort of like that classic Trek style. It's the cave set again, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
they used to call it Planet Hell was the set they had. Yeah, very much kind of to give you this sort of sense of that. It's all very dimly lit with smoke machines going off everywhere, and there's glittering creatures all around. I thought that was a lot of fun to do.
Good, yeah, it's always fun too. Like we recognize caves as an important part of Trek.
Absolutely.
Were there any scenes or moments that surprised you as they evolved during the writing of this?
That's a good question. I think, to me, the scenes that I felt like to write with all of the emotional core moments to the thing. Definitely, Ortegas confronting Luciana was one that I kind of went around and around on, because I felt like that was a real kind of hinge point for a lot of the story. And I think I rewrote that a few times, and I wasn't really sure where it would take place. So in the end, I just kind of started fooling around with it, and it's the scene where the confrontation is Ortegas is inside a shuttle, and she's kind of got her head underneath a console and she's doing something, and she hears somebody come in and she thinks it's somebody else. She's like, "Will you hand me that spanner?" And it's Luciana's come to talk to her, and she bangs her head on the console because she's not expecting it, which is kind of seems like a fun moment. It's like a comedy moment, but it's leading into a very serious conversation where the two of them basically just lay all their cards out on the table, because they are very similar people. And they do come from the same place. And a lot of layers, they are the same woman in a lot of ways. And so it was interesting for me to place them in that situation and have them just be brutally, utterly honest with each other. Yeah. Because that felt to me, again, that feels like something that is part of Ortegas as a character. She's honest, she's earnest, and what you see is what you get with her. And she doesn't leave anything behind. So I felt like that was the direction I wanted to take with that. And again, because Melissa Navia does such a great performance with that character, and the writing on the show is so strong, it's like I didn't need to do a lot of work. It's almost like the character is just saying this is how it's going to go, and I'm just channeling them as I'm writing the story.
Yeah, it does, and I think I'm a fan of the character. I'm a fan of Melissa Navia because I think she does such a fantastic job, like as you said. But it did feel so true to the character and the way she would approach this, and I think she struggles at times holding back and kind of towing that Starfleet line and not just saying, what she's feeling and top of mind, stream of conscious, maybe. So it was good to see her kind of still struggle with that, but also not be afraid to confront her distant relative. And that was good.
I think also Yeah, I was
Yeah,
going to
go
say,
ahead.
the thing that also to me was quite pivotal and quite important was
Hmm.
where Laan confronts Pike about
Yeah.
being brought back in time. Where so Laan is knocked unconscious, and when she wakes up, they're down on the planet, and they've made contact with these people. And she says to Pike, "What the hell have you done? It's like you shouldn't have done this. It's like you're messing with, you're breaking the temporal prime, or what they don't actually have that at this point, but the temporal prime directive.
Right.
You should be talking to these people." And Pike says, "Well, if I hadn't done that, you would die. And you should have let me die because this is how important it is." And of course, for her, it has such resonance because she's already had that experience with the alternate history, James Kirk.
Yeah.
So for her, there's a whole extra set of issues going on with her about I don't mess with time because I did that once and it turned out really badly, and what I cared about was like erased from history. So she has this whole emotional sort of thing going on there. Pike's got his own issues about having seen his own future self in time as well. So they're both coming at it from different directions, and they have this argument, and they're both right.
Yeah.
And to me, that was a really fun scene to write, to have the two of them confront this issue, coming at it from different directions and trying to find a way through. And they don't really find a good solution to it, which to me felt like a kind of true ending to that sequence.
Yeah. I I love the way you handled Laan in this because I think it's good to see her continuing to struggle with that period where she went back in time and things didn't work out, and she's not talked about that to any of the other folks. So, that's, I think, crucial to her, core to her. But I also think we see her a little bit kind of showcase her leadership a little bit more in this novel. There's an opportunity where everybody's hesitant to go kind of step into this archway and make that leap, and as Pike realizes he needs to be the one to lead it, she takes the step forward and decides to be the first one. And I don't know that, we've seen her lead, but this was her taking initiative for the greater good of everyone, and I thought it was a special moment for her.
Yeah, I felt like that was just a moment of almost, she's kind of like, "Oh, will you stop messing around, stop wasting time?" Just
Yeah.
impatient in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's just like, let's just get it done, right? Because she knows that it's this choice or nothing, right? So it's someone's gonna have to do it. It might as well be me. Is kind of what's going through her mind there. But
Yeah.
also, that choice she makes is she's gone through this storyline in the novel where she's been confronted by these characters from the past, and they see her as this character connected to Khan, Noonien, and Singh, who they all have a terrible kind of emotional connection to. And they see her immediately, they distrust her and they think she's a bad guy.
Yeah.
And so that's a whole element that they have to get by. And I think in a way, her taking the first step through the gateway is proving to those people that is not who I am.
Yeah.
I am somebody, I'm a good, decent person. I'm going to do the right thing, and I'm going to step into the gateway first to show you that it's okay. So that, in a way, I think was also her sort of reminding people who she is, and doing it in a positive, forward-moving way, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you did so well in this novel too I know we've talked about several of the characters and a lot of the lead characters, but we have, Uhura has a pivotal role in this. We see, is it Pelia? I always say her name wrong, but she's herself, her quirky self, and offering insight and things within this book too. So we see the bulk of the characters from Strange New Worlds in this, and I think that's appealing as a reader too, because they are very much an ensemble driven show, and this book comes across just in that same light. So yeah, I appreciate that.
I wanted to make sure that like everybody, every one of the main cast, and then the kind of like the A cast and the B cast, if you think of it like now, they all get a little something to do. So even again, Uhura doesn't play a big role in the story, but she does play an important role in the story, and she gets to do her thing well, which is to kind of like translate these languages, and the choices and the decisions that she makes. The story wouldn't move on without what she does. Without her contribution, the problem would not have been solved. So she plays a very important role in there. Again, getting Sam Kirk in there as well, just to do a little bit. That was fun to have him in the story. And even characters like Jenna Mitchell, who's just like one of the bridge crew. getting her to kind of have an opportunity to have some dialogue and and kind of unfold the character there. Pelia is always fun to do because she's just such a quirky, like you say, usual fun character. And I just, and again, because the character is so strongly written, I think the first scene where she turns up late for the meeting, and the crew meeting, and she says, "Oh, am I late?" And Pike says no, and Una says yes, and she doesn't care that she's late because that's the kind of character. She's just oh well, never mind, and and the small detail about the fact that she's memorized the registration numbers of every Starfleet vessel. It's just that, and they say like, well, how do you know that? She's like, well, what, don't you? It's like, I thought everybody knew that. To me, that felt like just something that she would do. Yeah, such a joy to write for, really.
Yeah. You talked about before about writing, from point A to, the end, like it just evolved as you go. But with all of these layers and the characters and the story, are you a big like outliner, or is it character first and then, all the tech talk and things like that second? What's your process there?
I'm a plotter, not a pantser. So yeah, and definitely with something like this where there's a lot of different moving parts in it, yeah, I line all that kind of stuff out. But I think in the early stage, I come at it from a question of like, what is cool? Oh. So I have an idea of what I think would be a fun idea. It's like, wouldn't it be interesting to the original, going right back, the original germ of the idea for this one was the question about the moral question of what happens if you meet a bunch of people who are time displaced and you have to leave them to die. That's the core idea. That was the very first idea I had, inspired by a concept a friend of mine, who's a Star Trek fan, was talking to me about. We were chatting about the Doomsday Machine. There's a line in the Doomsday Machine episode where is it Captain Decker, Commodore Decker says that he left his crew on a planet and he went off to fight the Doomsday Machine, and the Doomsday Machine blew the planet up and killed his entire crew. And we were saying, well, what would it have been like for those people to be on that planet? If you could have rescued those people, if you had that, would you leave them to die or would you rescue them? And that idea for me sparked the kind of set the ball rolling for what would eventually become the plotline for Toward the Night. So I think from there, that was kind of like where I began the whole process.
Talk to me about the significance of the title, Toward the Night.
I like lyrical titles. I feel like Star Trek always does well where you have a title that sounds really great, but maybe doesn't tie you down to actually meaning anything. Yeah. So I was trying to come up with something that was kind of much more illustrative about what the story was. And I thought in the end, I was like, no, I want to go up with something that just feels poetic, if that's it. And so I went through different ideas. And I think at the end of it, when I wrote the last line of the book, which is, describes the Enterprise kind of pulling out of orbit and like traveling on out into space toward the night, I thought, oh, there's my title.
Yeah,
and so that was where that came from.
It really felt, at least to me as a reader, that it applied to kind of what each of the stories within the story we're heading towards. Like, we've got to go through this darkness to get to the end. And it was very poetic, as you said. Like, it worked well. Is there a scene or passage from the novel that is especially satisfying to you to write once it was down?
I think, like I said before, the Pike La'an confrontation and Erica and Luciana, those two moments where the characters get to kind of confront each other, those were really satisfying to have the opportunity to do that. And also just, I think some of it in a more general sense, just fun for me to play around with the Enterprise era characters, situations, and just to generate that little group of characters, the new characters who had to see, and generate their interrelationships.
Yeah.
Have these people who've been stranded on this planet for like a year or so at this point, and they're kind of like their Starfleet regulations are broken down, but it's like, well, how would that affect you? It's a little bit like the cast of Lost, sort of stuck on this planet.
Yeah.
Their relationships have changed by that point. That to me was fun to write, and then have those characters suddenly Pike and his crew get dumped on them, and how they react to that. That was fun to do.
Yeah. you mentioned Lost. I think the big difference is Lost was in this like tropical paradise, and this crew on this planet, it's miserable, as you said.
Horrible.
They are getting it thrown at them from all angles. What do you hope that a reader will take from this novel?
Hopefully, my intention for this was just, as I said at the beginning, to kind of create something that feels like a good action-packed Star Trek romp. So that's what I want to communicate, is if you pick this book up, you're going to get, hopefully, a good, strong dose of Strange New Worlds, with all the characters that you like, getting to do cool stuff, and hopefully a little bit of a kind of emotional through line through there as well that will kind of tug at your heartstrings a little bit.
Yeah. Well, you succeeded. Absolutely. Talk to me, James. What's coming up next for you? Do you have any projects happening that you probably can't talk about?
Yeah, a bunch of stuff, all of which I am signed up for non-disclosure agreements for, so I can't talk about it.
Right.
Doing some work on a video game project. I have a new thriller novel that I'm working on as well, and another non-Star Trek related tie-in project that I'm developing at the moment. All of which I'm really excited about, but I can't say anything.
Right.
I always say to people, if you keep an eye on my website, jswallow.com, or you look me up on Twitter or X or Mastodon or any of the socials, and ask me questions about my stuff there, I'm always available to talk to people. That's where I'll talk about my new stuff coming up when I can talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, whatever comes next, if it's anything Trek, we'd love to have you back.
Oh, I'd love
to talk to you about it. I can't recommend the book enough. It's a great read. If you're a Star Trek fan, it's a must read. If you're a Strange New Worlds fan, it's an absolute must read. Pick it up because it's great stuff. A huge thanks to you, James, for joining us today and for crafting a story that boldly ventures into the unknown while staying grounded in what makes Strange New Worlds so powerful: character, conscience, and hope. If you haven't read Toward the Night yet, it's available now wherever you pick up your Trek reads. And if you have read it, we want to hear from you. What moments moved you? What echoes of Trek legacy did you feel between the lines? Let us know on social media at Clonestar Podcast, or drop a comment on YouTube. You can also support the show and beam into our behind-the-scenes world at patreon.com/Clonestar Podcast. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep sending messages toward the night with hope. Live long and prosper.